Chapter 8, Mainline Training. As expected, we were handcuffed and taken to ADSEG, administrative segregation, as soon as they looked at our hands. As pathetic as it may sound, none of the other Norteños in that yard busted a grape after we got rolled up. How they held their heads up and continued to function on that yard with any semblance of dignity is beyond my comprehension. Basically, the Sureños mopped Weasel up and were allowed to get away with it. I'm sure in the back of their minds they were laughing, saying to themselves, man, these fucking busters are a bunch of fucking pussies. Busters is a derogatory term used by Sureños to disrespect Norteños. Honestly, it no longer concerned me. I wasn't on that yard anymore, and if those homeboys were gonna accept that, then they deserved everything the Sureños gave them. Mikey and JR had paroled a week prior to this incident, so they were both gone. Duke ended up getting rolled up a day later after somebody dropped a kite on him, alleging that he was conspiring with other Northerners to retaliate. There were a couple other homeboys on that yard that I took a liking to, but since none of them followed us to ADSEG for handling their business, I could care less what happened to any of them either. My first time in ADSEG was uneventful. There were some other Norteños there, but we didn't stay long enough to really touch base with any of them. They were housed on the other side of the building. My lockup order stated that I was housed in ADSEG because I was suspected of being involved in a physical altercation with the Southern Hispanic inmates, and the marks on my hands substantiated their allegation. What could I say? But we only stayed there long enough to go to our first classification review before we were reclassified and kicked out to the level 3 Lassen yard. Also, Johnny and Duke paroled within 3 weeks after we hit the yard. The level 3 yard was a lot different than the level 2 yard. This was all cell living, so I no longer had to deal with the peevish annoyances of dorm living. I had my own cell. There were 5 buildings on this yard. Buildings 1, 2, 3, and 5 were all mainline buildings. Building 4 was ADSEG, where I had just come from. I was now housed in Building 3. As soon as I walked in the building with my property, I was approached by a brother named Eddie Noodles Echavarria from Salinas and another brother named Geronimo Cardenas from Soledad. Apparently, they already knew I was getting released from ADSEG and were aware of my status as an NR member. Geronimo was the OA, overall authority on this yard. There was another individual by the name of Frank Kiki Rivera from San Jose, who Geronimo was working with, that claimed to be a big homie, an NF member. But this guy ended up being a defector. He had basically slipped through the cracks and had infiltrated the yard. In my mind, this guy was suspect from the day I met him, and I didn't believe he was a carnal. Carnal is a term used to describe NF members. It means brother in Spanish. Something about his character rubbed me the wrong way, and I just got bad vibes from him. But by the time we got clarification on his status, he had already paroled. There were a lot of solid Norteños on Lassen yard, or so I thought. The whole atmosphere differentiated vastly from the level 2 yard. We were about 140 strong, but it was balanced out, so the Sureños were just as deep. The homeboys from Sacramento had a heavy presence on that yard, and I would later find out that their influence with the administration there was unbounded. A lifer by the name of Demon from Decoto and Payaso from Sacramento had clerical jobs in the watch office, so they underhandedly held a lot of strings and had major pull on that yard. I settled into a good routine pretty quick within the first couple of weeks, and I even came up on a TV that one of the homeboys left behind for me. I was usually either on the way pile driving iron with Geronimo or posted up on one of the tables keeping security. I was comfortable on that yard, and for a while it was good to be out there. I met another homeboy from my neighborhood by the name of Richard Wizard Royball, who I would end up becoming real tight with. Wizard was just a solid Norteño and pretty much kept to himself. He was a YA baby, raised in the youth authority, so he knew how to do his time and he carried himself well. If he was needed, he'd be there with no questions asked, but he steered clear of the politics. This was something that I admired about him. His hustle was tattooing, and that's what he spent most of his time doing. He had some of the best work I've ever seen, and over the next couple of months, he would end up doing a lot of work on me. A few months later, Wizard paroled back to San Francisco and wasn't even out 2 weeks before he was killed. Apparently, he was at the Cliff House by the beach in the Sunset District with some friends when they encountered a guy beating up his girlfriend. A homegirl by the name of Flaca Negra, Patty, said something to this guy in an attempt to intervene, and words were exchanged. Wizard was with Flaca Negra that day, so he ended up getting drawn into a verbal confrontation with this Asian guy, and it quickly turned physical. The Asian guy pulled a knife out and fatally stabbed Wizard one time in the stomach. The wound was fatal and he bled out before the paramedics arrived. Another homeboy, Jose Pep Amaya from Cortland, who was with Wizard, also had his hand sliced open when he came to Wizard's aid. Later, after I ended up paroling, I would wrongfully confront Pep and blame him for what happened to Wizard. I went after him physically and it was completely undeserving. I eventually heard about all the details that happened that day, and despite what I was first told, Pep apparently had Wizard's back that day. I heard about what happened to Wizard within a week after another one of my homeboys mailed me the newspaper clipping. In the summer of 1991, tensions began to escalate on the yard between the Sureños and us. There were a lot of wild youngsters on the yard, and it was becoming a hotbed for conflict. They ended up giving me a job working in the kitchen, and for the most part, this kept me busy. This was my first job, and I actually liked it. It gave me a sense of responsibility, something I had never given myself a chance to experience on the streets. I started working the food line, serving the food and distributing the trays. This was another huge adjustment for me. It put me in close proximity with some of the Sureños who also had kitchen jobs. Since I was being forced to work with them, it didn't take long for a conflict to develop. Had I been older with a little more experience, I would have handled this situation differently, but I was only 21 and still quick-tempered. A Sureño by the name of Rascal from Grape Street got assigned to work on my line. It became obvious really fast that this fool had a big chip on his shoulder. He kept jamming the trays, trying to push the line so the guy at the window couldn't push them out. Eventually, I spoke up and told him, "Hey, you fucking idiot, quit jamming the fucking trays." He said, "Hey," I said, "you worry about your job and I'll worry about mine." I said, "You heard what I said." By now, I was lead man on the line, so it was my job to have 2 people stay back every day to clean the line and finish breaking everything down. Today happened to be Rascal's day. When we were done serving chow, I noticed that Rascal and one of his little buddies were huddled up in a corner, obviously talking about what had happened. His buddy was trying to pump him up to check me, confront me about it. Rascal walked up and said, "Hey, S.N., talk to me with some respect, and I give you respect. Otherwise, if you got a problem, let me know." I wasn't even taking this guy serious. In my mind, I was saying to myself, "You gotta be fucking kidding me. This fool's really trying to jam me up." Rascal wasn't even Hispanic. He was a blue-eyed, blonde-headed white boy who wore state boots that were probably 3 times bigger than his feet. It was comical. Literally. I'm dead serious about that too. I told him, "Matter of fact, I do got a problem, and I'm even gonna scratch you off the list to stay back so we can go ahead and deal with it as soon as they open the doors." There were no other Northerners working in the kitchen with me, so I basically was by myself. When the doors opened, I walked out the chow hall with Rascal and his boy. He told me, "Let's go to my building." So we started walking across the yard to building 5 where he was housed at. As we walked across the yard, Rascal started calling out to some of his other homeboys, telling them we were about to handle our business one-on-one in his cell. By this time, one of my homeboys by the name of Mario Rooster Avalos from San Jose saw what was happening and asked Rascal why he was calling all his boys. He said, "You don't need to get everyone involved. That's between you two." Rooster told me, "Make that fool go to your building." So we cut straight across the yard and entered building 2 during the 10-minute unlock. When we got inside the building, I got my door popped open and stepped inside. Rascal stepped in behind me and it was over within the first minute. He rushed me like a wild man. All I did was dip down, pick him up, put him flat on his back, and use the floor to try to bust his head open. Between playing basketball with his head on the concrete, I took all head and face shots, only stopping long enough to catch my breath or get better aim between his flailing hands. He was a lot taller than me, but I was a lot healthier and he couldn't get me off of him. I kept him pinned down and continued drilling his face until he tapped out and said, "Alright, S.J., you got me, I'm done." I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but it wasn't even a fight. I don't think this guy even hit me once. Eventually, I let him up and told him, "Get your sorry ass out of my fucking cell, don't run your mouth again." As he was walking out, I gave him one last good kick in the butt just to humiliate him in front of his homeboys who were in the day room watching. When we got into the sally port leading back out to the yard, I got in his face again and told him, "Whenever you want your runbacks, you know what cell I'm in." The following day, I saw him on the yard wearing a pair of oversized glasses in an attempt to hide the two black eyes he now had. Years later, I would end up running into him when I passed through the Adjustment Center, AC, in San Quentin. He picked up a death penalty case and has been there ever since. We ended up talking about this and laughing about it because the whole issue was over nonsense and it was obviously a result of us being youngsters. Not long after this, Geronimo and Noodles got rolled up for getting caught with weapons. They were attempting to bury two flats that we got from a homeboy who was working in vocation, but the yard officers were apparently watching the whole time. Meanwhile, a handful of NR members began driving up. Jimmy Chino Valdivia from Salas, Fabian Zavala from King City, Joel Lopez from San Jose, Paul Paco Williams from Sacramento, and Cruz Sleepy Vasquez from San Jose. This was a time when tensions were still high with the Sureños. One morning, we all decided to get together on the yard for the purpose of discussing how we were going to handle the situation that was developing on the yard. The Sureños were getting too deep. Some of the brothers began to feel like it was probably better if we took out some of their leadership before they targeted us. There were two older Sureños in particular that we were focusing on, and they both had too much influence on the yard. We decided that we were going to take these two out, but there seemed to be some question as to who was going to do it. I raised my hand right off the bat. I wanted to do it, and this was a good opportunity for me to earn my bones. Besides, nobody else was taking the initiative. The following day, I packed up all my property and headed out for the yard. I knew I'd end up getting caught hitting this guy because I was going to do it on the yard, and I knew I wasn't going to get away with it. The plan was for me to pick up the weapon from one of the homeboys who was going to dig it up and have it ready for me on the weight pile. Once I had the weapon, I was supposed to make a beeline straight for my target. But this whole thing was poorly planned from the beginning. When I walked out on the yard and got a visual on my target, he was sitting at a table in front of Building 5 playing cards. This guy made a habit out of surrounding himself with at least 5 or 6 younger Sureños, so I was already faced with a small obstacle, getting close enough to get a good shot without tipping my hand or taking away the element of surprise. I didn't live in Building 5, so just the fact that I had to approach that building would probably draw a lot of suspicion in itself. But I had no recourse. I had to make it work. I was already mapping out and envisioning my plan in my mind. I just walked a couple laps around the track, and when I got close enough, I'd rush the table and take my shot. One of my homeboys, Negro from Chole, had the weapon. When I got to the weight pile to retrieve the weapon, I told him to wait until I was ready before he handed it to me. I knew the gun tower and the yard officers were probably watching, so I wanted to act like I was doing a couple sets of curls to make it look good. But Negro panicked. He already had the weapon wrapped in a state shirt and was trying to hand it to me. As soon as he handed it to me, I knew it was all bad because the exchange was real sloppy. One of the other brothers, Fabian Zavala, was standing there with Negro and asked me who was going with me. I told him nobody, I'm going by myself. That's how ill-planned this was. I never should have been sent to do this by myself, but at the time, I didn't know any better. I should have had at least a squad of 3 with me so that they could come in and bomb on my target after I hit him. This would have given me time to get away, dispose of the weapon, and put security on me. Fabian just took it upon himself to say, "I'm going with you." I looked back at my target and then I caught a break. He was standing right next to the building walkway, talking to the second target. I was thinking, maybe I can hit both of them at the same time. As we came off the weight pile and started heading toward Building 5, I could feel my heart beating in my chest. I got that nauseated feeling in my stomach that I always got when I was about to do something I knew could end up going wrong. Not so much because I was about to stab somebody. I'd done it before. It was more so because of all the different things that could have happened or things that could go wrong. This was the first time I was about to put in work on a yard under the gun. I could get shot doing this, maybe even killed, if the gunner saw a weapon in my hand. It's an unsettling feeling. Anyone that says they're not nervous when doing something like this is lying. It's your body's natural reaction when all your senses are peaking. Only a dumb fool wouldn't be nervous. As we got halfway across the yard, I noticed that the front door to Building 4 opened up and 2 yard officers came out, heading straight for us. The direct line of eye contact they gave us and the brisk pace they walked was a dead giveaway that they were on to us. And from the angle they took, they would have cut us off before we made it. There was a small group of Northerners in front of the laundry room, so me and Fabian walked toward them to blend in and get rid of the peace, but it was too late. As soon as the officers got close enough, they told all of us to put our hands up on the fence. Then they began patting us down. All I could do was drop it through one of the holes in the chain link fence and hope that they wouldn't see it. But it dropped straight down to the other side and stood out on the grass like a sore thumb. Fabian was standing next to me, so it landed directly in between us. As they patted me and Fabian down, they saw it. The gun tower radioed in and told them that we were the two who had just come off the weight pile and that they saw the whole exchange. Fabian and I were both handcuffed and escorted back to ADSEC. This time I was given a DA referral for possession of a stabbing instrument and retained in ADSEC pending my new case. Geronimo and Noodles were still there waiting to get transferred out to the SHU segregated housing unit. The DA declined to pick up any of these cases, so now all we had to do was wait for our 115 hearing, Rules Violation Report, RVR 115, and for classification to give us our SHU time. During the next couple of months while we were there with Geronimo, we went over the 14 bonds in the NR format, just the basic stuff. Geronimo had been an NR member a lot longer than me and Fabian, but he wasn't known for having a lot of knowledge. In fact, I thought he lacked in his own schooling and demonstrated this when he made meager attempts to educate us. I had a good rapport with Geronimo and we never had any personal issues, but I would soon come to realize that he was somewhat of a tyrant. In one instance, there was a homeboy by the name of Sapo from Oakland who was there with us but was housed in the next section over. Back in the early 1990s, they still allowed tobacco smoking in prison, and in fact, they supplied everyone with 1 pouch and 2 books of matches during supplies. Well, apparently, one of Sapo's neighbors, who was a Sureño, asked Sapo for a light, and Sapo shot him a book of matches. Under any other circumstances, this would have been considered nothing more than an act of harmless cordiality, and nothing would have come of it. But Geronimo overheard this and became dead set on making an example out of him. His reasoning was based on the grounds of Sapo breaching security for providing the enemy with materials that could have been utilized to construct a weapon. Some straight bullshit. In my mind, Geronimo overstepped his boundaries and was manipulating a reason to justify hitting Sapo, but I was in no position to question this. The following week, we moved Sapo into our section and waited for the next program when he would be coming out with us. When we came out for our showers, Geronimo pulled me and Fabian aside and told us to hit Sapo. I could tell that Sapo sensed something was wrong because he constantly looked over his shoulder. and he even asked me if he'd done anything wrong. But I just told him that everything was cool and that he didn't have anything to worry about. When Fabian and I walked over to Sapo, he was visibly uncomfortable. He was watching us, but all it took was for him to look away for a fraction of a second and it was over. He took one good shot to the front of the throat and ran to the front of the section, yelling for the gunner to help him. As soon as it was over, I slid the piece under one of the homeboys' doors so he could flush it, and then I walked away. When the gunner realized what had happened, he made us all lay on the ground. The guards then came in and cuffed up me and Fabian. This earned us another DA referral, but again they declined to pick up the case. I was still looking at another 4 years before I maxed out my number, but Fabian was already maxing his number out, so he offered to plead guilty to both of the 115s if they cut me loose. There was no sense in both of us catching shoe terms for it, so it was just a matter of waiting to see if they would let him do it. From the cell I was in, I had a clear shot at a small area of the 3-yard from my back window. I could look through my window and see some of the handball courts in front of building 3, enough to where I was able to communicate with some of the homeboys out there. I knew Payaso from Sacramento had a lot of juice out there, so I got him to come up to my window and told him what Fabian and I were trying to do. I told him to get me back out there and to do whatever he could to put in a good word for me. A couple days later, a lieutenant came in to hear our 115s and let Fabian plead guilty to both of them. This was definitely Payaso's doing, and this was when I realized just how much pull he had out there. The lieutenant even dropped a lug saying, "Your boys really want you back out there. When you come back, stay out of trouble." I went to classification review a week later and was released back out to the Lassen yard. However, Geronimo was already scheming on a way to bring me right back. He sent me back out to the yard with directives to hit a homeboy by the name of Joker from Lodi. According to Geronimo, this guy was supposed to have been a dropout and had been on the BNL, the bad news list. A hit list composed of dropouts, defectors, and known enemies, but that's all he told me. Geronimo laid out my directives. I was to go straight out there and hit him. I wasn't to expose these directives to nobody, including the other brothers out there. His reasoning for this was that he didn't want anybody else to stop or interfere with the move. But this wasn't standard protocol, and it put me in a precarious position. On one hand, I would be intentionally defying a direct order if I deviated from the precise way in which I was ordered to carry out the hit. And on the other hand, I would be breaching the household security and possibly hitting somebody that may have been investigated and cleared by them. I took the directive with me, but didn't comply with his instructions when it came to not advising the other brothers out there what I was directed to do. I had no problem with hitting Joker if the household cleared it, but one of the things I learned early on in this game was to always cover your own ass, and that's what I was doing. So I took this straight to the OA, overall authority, and was told that Geronimo no longer had any say-so on the yard and that he was now directing me to stand down on the hit. So I did. But I asked the OA if he could advise Geronimo of this and to make it clear that he was taking full responsibility for this himself. This put me in the clear. Geronimo could make a case that I disobeyed a direct order by not following his directive, but this wouldn't hold any weight because he'd have to answer as to why he broke protocol and placed me in this type of position. Later on that same day, I was moved to Building 5 where Payaso and a lot of the other homeboys from Sacramento were housed. As soon as I walked in the building, I noticed that one of the building porters was a Sureño by the name of Junior from Riverside. This guy was on the 2-yard with me and was one of the more influential individuals who always seemed to be in the mix. This guy wasn't involved in the incident where Weasel got rushed, but he was on the yard when it happened. I didn't really care for this guy, and as far as I was concerned, he was guilty by association. As I walked up the stairs, we made eye contact, which ended up turning into a staring match. This fool was trying to mean mug me. He said, "What's up, S.N.? You got something you want to get off your chest?" I said, "Yeah, but hey, hold that thought." I just wanted to get my cell open and have one of the homeboys keep point for me. As soon as I got my cell open, I walked outside and told Payaso and Tootie from Sacramento both about what had just happened. I told them I wanted to go back in there and beat this dude's ass. When we walked back into the building, I walked up to Junior's cell, opened his door, and told him, "Hey, I'm ready to get that off my chest now." He looked at me like he didn't expect me to make an issue out of this, but he still followed me back to my cell. Once again, it was over almost before it even started. Junior tried to square up with me and he put up a better fight than Rascal, but again, I won that day, and in my mind, this was just another notch under my belt. I practically had him begging me to stop. Believe it or not, this wasn't doing anything to help my ego either. All it was doing was going straight to my head. I was still young and really thought I could beat up the world, and this made me believe it. Over the next couple of months, tensions on the yard would continue to escalate. The gym was being converted into a huge overflow dorm with approximately 200 additional bunks. I questioned the brothers about why nothing happened after Fabian and I got rolled up and was given somewhat of a commensurable explanation. Apparently, they slammed the yard down after we got rolled up with the weapon in anticipation that some of the other Northerners were still planning on attacking the Southerners. The administration claimed that they had received multiple sources of information indicating as such. During the month-long lockdown, the two intended targets had parole, so things just kind of fizzled out. I felt like they still should have hit some targets, especially after Fabian and I got rolled up. But it was almost 4 months later, and there really wasn't too much more I could say about it. I just had to be patient, as another opportunity would come sooner or later. Within a week after I got released from ADSEG, I managed to get myself another job as the recreational clerk, distributing all the recreational equipment, i.e. basketballs, softball equipment, horseshoes, weight belts, and 10-pound plates. This job was kickback and it definitely had its benefits. For one, it was located between the chow hall and the gym in a small fenced-in enclosure, so it put me in a prime position to work while monitoring all yard movement at the same time. I also had my own weight pile within the enclosure, gave me a restricted area to bury weapons, in that it wasn't accessible to the rest of the yard. In 1991, Northerners from Fresno, California were still programming on the yard with us. A split was evolving, but it was still in the beginning stages. Norteños from Fresno began to separate themselves from the Norteño collective and openly declared themselves as a separate individual entity. They no longer wished to fall under the dictates of the Nuestra Familia or the Nuestra Raza and chose to function independently. This was the result of high-ranking NF members such as Eddie Cracker Vignola and others falling out of favor with the NF and using their influence in Fresno to turn them away from the NF following. The four major barrios, Eastside, Parkside, Sunset, and Pinedale, had united to form the nucleus of F14. F14 would later morph into the Fresno Bulldogs, who were anti-NF and who became arch enemies with the NF. But in 1991, this split was still evolving and the homeboys from Fresno still coexisted with us. Even though Fresno was separating itself and breaking away, they were still considered Norteños, and there was still a feeble alliance. One morning when I was working outside my little enclosure, I noticed that there seemed to be an unusual number of homeboys from Fresno in the yard, and small pockets of grouping. The Sureños were also thick out there that morning, and I could sense something was about to kick off. I still had a good rapport with a lot of homeboys from Fresno, and I kept an open line of communication with them. I called one over to the fence and asked him what was going on. Usually, they'd give us a heads up if they were about to get off with the Sureños, but as far as I knew, nobody said anything that morning. The Sureños didn't recognize any divisions with us, and I wanted to make sure nothing was happening that I needed to know about. Basically, he told me that one of his homeboys named Tiny had an issue with one of the Sureños housed in the gym. They had exchanged words, and up until that point, that's all it was. It sounded like nothing was going to come of it. However, I let Sleepy know so he could put the rest of the brothers on a full 60, a security caveat advising everyone to elevate their level of awareness to the highest degree, as something was more than likely about to happen. As soon as I got word to Sleepy, I noticed that there was some kind of commotion on the far end of the yard between buildings 4 and 5. Apparently, a youngster by the name of Angel from Sanger, a Fresno sympathizer, walked up to the Sureño to confront him, and the Sureño sliced him with the razor. The gunner who was right above me took 2 quick shots in that direction with the Mini 14 and ordered the whole yard to get down. It was over that fast. Once again, the Sureños drew first blood, and this time they definitely weren't going to get away with it. Even though Angel was a Fresno sympathizer and the conflict was with Fresno, I still looked at this as an attack on the Norteño collective and directed at us as a whole. For the next 3 weeks, the entire yard stayed on lockdown and they ran controlled feeding for the northern and southern Hispanics. I was already planning on hitting the first Sureño I could get as soon as the doors opened and we got off lockdown. But the other brothers told me to wait. They wanted to coordinate a massive hit on the Sureño leadership. I waited until the lockdown was lifted to hear what they were proposing. By this time, the gym was packed with Sureños. Payaso and Demon were both gone, and we no longer had influence with the administration we once had when they were clerks. They kept the numbers balanced out, but now it was egregiously unbalanced. The Sureños had numerical superiority on the yard. There was about 80 Norteños to approximately 180 Sureños. All the buses coming in were coming from the Southern Reception Center in Chino, and this gave us more reason to be concerned. Not to mention that a lot of the Sureños were older guys who had been around. At this time, I was the OA on the yard, so it was basically my call on how we decided to deal with this issue. Chino, Sleepy, and Paco wanted to coordinate an all-out attack in each building. At the same time, Building 3 was going to take off at the last 7 o'clock unlock, and then Buildings 1, 2, and 5 would follow suit at the sound of the first alarm. We were spread out evenly in these buildings, and the plan sounded good, so I was in full agreement. All I was thinking was that everything these Sureños had done since the 2-yard incident was about to come back and bite them in the ass, and I couldn't wait to give it to them. By launching an all-out attack simultaneously, this would give us ample time to rock these buildings and keep it going. There's no way they were going to be able to summon enough officers to respond to all the buildings at the same time. All we had to do now was retrieve our weapons and see how many Norteños were willing to assist us. When I went to work the following day, I dug up 2 flats I had buried underneath the recreational shack. One was for me and the other was for my cellie, Wino from Early Mart. Wino was just a solid Norteño, but he offered to assist us. Later on that evening, after I got off work, I made my rounds on the yard in an attempt to rally up additional Norteños. My only interest was who wanted to go and who was staying. I made it clear I had no interest in hearing anyone's politicking, that it wasn't something I would talk about. I didn't care to hear about any consequences either. All I wanted to know was whether they were with us or not. This came with an ominous warning. If you don't come with us on the first wave, don't expect to be embraced if you end up in the hole for becoming a victim or for any other reason other than getting off. It's every Norteño's responsibility and duty to fight for and protect this household, period. If you fail to honor this fundamental responsibility for any reason whatsoever, then you're not worthy to continue existing amongst us. I even attempted to proposition Fresno and get them on board with us, but they bowed out, thinking that we'd turn on them once we all got to ADSEG. Later that day, I was unexpectedly approached by 2 Sureños, Eddie Boy from Diamonds, Junior Selly, and Capone from 18th Street. They said they wanted to get at me about a rumor circulating on the yard. I'd spoken to these 2 individuals in the past about minor issues that developed amongst our people. In turn, we had somewhat of an open line of communication and mutual respect for one another. By now, I had been in quite a few fights with their homeboys. We had actually joked about it in the past, opening that door of communication. The rumor circulating was that we were planning to move on them that night, and we were supposed to kick it off in all the buildings at the same time. Someone apparently leaked information intentionally to sabotage our plan, or someone within us was working against us. They said, "Look, Boxer, the individuals that hit your homeboy Angel are gone. They're not here no more, and it was an isolated incident. We didn't even know that it was going to happen. There's nothing happening on this yard. If there's someone specific that's creating problems, let us know and we'll take care of it. We got it good here. Everyone's hitting their clavo. We're making money. This is a feed 'em yard." I quickly brushed this off and tried putting them at ease by agreeing with them. I adamantly denied that there was any truth to the rumors. I said, "I don't know where these rumors are coming from, but don't read too much into it. Somebody's obviously trying to play us against each other. Like you said, this is a good yard. Nothing's happening here. But if there was, I think we have a good enough rapport to bring our issues to the table." I assured them that I'd look into where the rumor came from and would get back at them. I felt confident that this somewhat set their minds at ease. But there was no way we could go forward with the original plan because they were definitely going to be on their toes tonight. As soon as I got back to my building, I told Sleepy Chino and Paco about the conversation I just had with Eddie Boy and Capone. They were just as surprised as I was that somebody had leaked out our plans so fast. We quickly decided that we were going to bump this up and just do it in the chow hall instead. The new plan was simple. The brothers in buildings 1 and 2 would go into the chow hall 1 and wait until the rest of us in buildings 3 and 5 were released. Once we were all in the chow hall, we'd all get up as if exiting the dining area and then advance on the Sureños tables once we got close enough. The chow hall was divided into sections based on ethnicity or affiliation. At the far south end, there were 3 rows of tables used by the African American inmates. The next 3 rows were used by the Northern Hispanics. The 3 rows after that were used by the Sureños. And the last 3 rows were used by the Caucasians. So the Northern and Southern Hispanic tables were directly in the middle, literally feet apart. This would make it fairly easy to get close enough without drawing too much suspicion. After we discussed the new plan, I went back to my cell and told Wino what we decided to do and explained why. Wino didn't care. He just wanted to get paid and said it didn't matter just as long as he was invited. I gave him one of the pieces I dug up, and then we both proceeded to take down all our pictures and pack up all our personal property.